We're in the run-up to next Sunday's first round of local elections here in France. A record number of slates with candidates from the far-right National Front, 596 to be precise. We're talking about it with French pollster and blogger Raphael LECLERC, MIHAELY, editor-in-chief of Causeur magazine, France 24's Cyril VANIER, whose report we saw in part one of our discussion. We went to the eastern French region of Lorraine, and we're also with sociologist Nacira GUENIF. Nacira, when you looked at that report, do you say to yourself, France has changed?
Well, actually, when I started field research 30 years ago, it was in Montfermeil, Seine-Saint-Denis, and this kind of...
in the suburbs of Paris.
Yes, and what I saw is quite similar to what we heard and what we understand from what people say. It was the place where you would find skyrocketing unemployment. You would find very hard housing situations. And obviously what happened then, back there, seems to have spread out to the whole country.
It's spread out, but here's the interesting bit. The last time the National Front fielded nearly as many candidates in local elections was 1995. And the suburbs you're talking about were places where they had a lot of candidates. By 2008, those numbers had dwindled sharply. And this is what the map of France looked like in 2008 in terms of places where there are candidates for the National Front. You see a lot on the French Riviera, some around the second city, Lyon, and a few in the north. Now, look at the map for this year. As we said, 596 slates of candidates, and this corroborates a bit what Cyril was saying. Fewer in the Paris area, fewer in the area around Lyon, more in the Rust Belt, if you will, of the north and east of France, and of course on the French Riviera. MIHAELY, has the National Front moved to the countryside?
Actually, it's not exactly the countryside, because it's not only about people raising cows and farmers that are worried about stolen tractors. It's what we can describe as beyond the suburbs, or
exurbs. I think.
Yes. Or what certain sociologists and geographers call the losers of globalization. The French too many. The French, who the current economic model doesn't know what to do with them, because the French economy today doesn't need them. So in areas like Lyon or Paris, megapolis connected to the globalization, with airports, with banks, with highly educated people, they are, generally speaking, the winners of in the new game. And the people we saw are the losers. And what makes things worse, that contrary to the United States, where you see the television crew after a hurricane, and you see people behind the ruined house, they say yes, and we'll build it again. In France, they'll say we are waiting for the state. Even when French say that they are apolitical or they hate politics, they are very, very political, because they want a lot from the state. And we know that the state, for many good and bad reasons, is getting weaker. We saw what the mayor said. The mayor is representing the state, and he says, I have no power. So people who grew up in a world where every generation was supposed to be better off than the previous generation, they are discovering in the last 15 years that their children will have, materially speaking, less than they, who are used to look up to the state, and now there's no answer, and who start to understand that in the new globalization game, it's like the game with the music and the chairs. The orchestra stopped, and there's no chair for them, and they feel that the messages of the National Front, which is basically populist, which means the main idea is to criticize elites and to suggest a kind of a deal between a very competent leadership and the people, they feel that comforting, because what people tell them is that it's enough for us to win the elections. We have the ideas. We'll solve your problems.
A lot of comments coming in. Here's one from Asterix in the EU. He says, with scandals hurting the reputation of the traditional right and left, Le Pen's National Front is looking good for municipal elections. Raphael Leclerc, there was an interesting bit in the report when Cyril went to see that young man who's suffering a temporary layoff, and he was complaining about the fact that they shouldn't overtax bosses. There is the sense, does that corroborate a bit what Gil was saying, that
he's talking like Joe the plumber.
He's talking like Joe the plumber, and that the left, which believes in the state being part of the solution, that worker doesn't believe the state is part of the solution.
Yeah, I think what is interesting now when you look at who's voting for the National Front is that it's now absolutely not homogeneous. You have people from the 16th arrondissement, the bourgeois in Paris.
Because before it was disgruntled communists.
Yeah. So now you have various types of voters coming to the National Front. One reason is because Marine Le Pen decided to build a second pillar for the National Front. For 25 years, Jean-Marie Le Pen said, I am an anti-immigration party against the European Union, and I'd like to increase security, mainly. And Marine Le Pen, when she came 5-7 years ago, she said, I will build a second pillar based on economy. And she's building the second pillar. And now, when you look at the National Front and the electors, you see that National Front is now the second party when you look at employees and workers. It was the case for the first round of 2012. So I think they're making progress, and they're speaking to a more wider electorate.
Cyril Vanier, I was going to ask you about that.
Well, I agree, and this is what we observed. That's what we saw in the field. And one of the reasons why Marine Le Pen can reach a wider voter base than her father ever did is because she has changed her message in several ways. Sure, she is talking about things that people really care about, the economy. That's very important. But also, people no longer feel guilty about voting for the National Front. It was taboo in France for decades because the party was consistently accused of pushing a racist agenda. And so saying you voted for the National Front was tantamount to saying, yes, I'm racist. Now you walk around in the Meuse and people will tell you the National Front has changed. The party is no longer what you knew it to be. We are not racist. The party is not racist. And so that taboo no longer exists. So the party is now, the playing field has been leveled, and the party is now compared to other parties based on their policies, so their economic policies, their immigration policies. But there is no longer that veil of that taboo surrounding the National Front
stigma.
Party.
A lot of comments coming in. This one supporting Marine Le Pen, it seems. The National Front is the most popular party in France. There's nothing racist or fascist about Marine Le Pen. Let's hear what Marine Le Pen. There was a rally recently in Marseille, in the south of France, where she spoke. And she, again, says that she is not far right. Let's hear what she had to say.
A Europe with a Germany that is authentically German, an Italy or Spain that is authentically Italian or Spanish, and a France that is truly French.
Nacira, is she far right?
Well, she is far right, and she doesn't need anymore to say that she's racist because her electors say so. I mean, she doesn't have to have this kind of stance saying, you know, this is what le penisation des esprits, the fact that there has this spread out of the discourse and the stances and the way they would always push forward, as you said, racist and anti-immigration agenda. This is something that they don't need to do anymore because it's all spread out in the society. Racism has become some sort of a virtuous and patriotic feeling. I mean, when you say that you hate Arabs, as someone just said in the report that you showed, it feels like someone is saying that I'm a real French. And the way that I can express that is by saying that I don't want more immigration. I hate Arabs, and the Arabs should be spelled out of the country. So what is interesting
So her opinions have gone mainstream.
Yeah, and she doesn't need anymore to have any racist stances, because people who vote for, who intend to vote for them, do that instead of them. So it's very, I mean, it's quite comfortable for the National Front. They don't, although we know that from the inside there has been affairs about people that wanted to be become part of the National Front and then resigned because they knew that inside the party there is this kind of racist stance that goes on. But when they go public, they don't pronounce anything of that kind anymore. But the people who will vote for them know that they can express that and they can feel some sort of a...
The traditional voter base is still there. No
Yeah,
doubt, that's what we saw.
yeah. So it's like, you know, it's this is why it spreads out, because there is kind of feeling that saying that is not a problem anymore. So being a racist, to some extent, is a way to express a deep-rooted Frenchness, whereas in the past, you were supposed to express your Frenchness in a different way. But now being a racist is part of being French.
It's a bit more complicated than that. We saw the group in the cafe sitting with an Algerian guy, and
who felt very uncomfortable.
Who felt very uncomfortable.
But nevertheless agrees with pretty much everything they said.
Yes, and they didn't. I didn't feel that they have any particular animosity to him, and I think that when he reminded them that he's Algerian, they felt also uncomfortable because there was a concrete stranger, and it was a kind of a mental construction. And it happened to me in the past. I did some work in Marseille, and someone talked about Arabs as if they were cockroaches. And then his daughter came in, and her boyfriend was of Algerian origin, and he embraced the father. And they went out to the cinema or something, and it's as if there was no connection between the
disconnect.
His daughter is dating an Arab, and he's talking about a fictional Arab. So I'm not suggesting to give him the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm just trying to say that this is a very complicated discourse to understand, and what we need to understand that what France is living through is beyond an economic crisis. It's almost a civilization crisis.
Almost a civilization crisis. Again, a lot of comments coming in. This one from Nicolas. He doesn't agree with the National Front's policies. He says, the National Front's the worst party ever and it will never lead France. Never. Last fall, there was a book by a prominent French intellectual that made waves. Alain Finkielkraut, who contributes to Closer, your magazine.
Causeur.
Causeur, excuse
Causeur.
me. You have to say it the French way. He wrote a book called L'identité malheureuse, the unhappy identity, about those, as he put it, who dare not call themselves native French, but the sedentary French. When the cyber cafe is called bled.com and the butcher shop or the fast food chain, both are halal, these sedentaries go through the experience of exile. They haven't moved, but everything around them has changed. That caused a storm, that book, because it's seen as racist. Is it racist when he says that?
Well, some might think that it is. I mean, I'm not sure that Finkielkraut feels it is. I don't think that he says that in a racist perspective, or that he feels that he's entitled to express anything.
But France, the country of where you're supposed to, the Republic is supposed to be blind to people's origins.
It's not anymore. It has never been, actually.
He's definitely in an us v them mode.
Yeah, he is. And this has been going on for a long time. I mean, in the 90s, you could do field research right here in Paris and meet people that would tell you, around the corner, I couldn't find a place where I can buy my mustard. And this is Paris. So this is this kind of feeling that of dispossession, of loss of substance, of some sort of a collapse of identity that is going on, has taken place for like 30 years. And this is something that you could sense when you could see the places where immigrants would meet with French. This is where this happens. And so what happened 30 years ago is now spreading out to the whole society. So racism is something that can be expressed in many ways, even though people would think that I'm not racist saying so.
And
but
do you think that what Finkelkraut writes is racist?
I think it could definitely lead to racism.
MIHAELY?
When you're talking about Alain Finkielkraut or any other philosopher or thinker, it's always complicated to cite a few words. You need to read the whole book. There's a whole argument here, which starts with the fact that probably the national framework is the only anthropological framework in which a body politic and a democracy can function. Where there's no nation, you have either Somalia or Yemen or Iraq or the Ukraine. And what we felt in the West for the last decades, that we can only be legal, that being French is having this passport and nothing else, we see that in the reality it doesn't work like that. So the question is how to define this undefinable. So the left suggested for a long time to ignore it because anyway it brings wars like the First and the Second World War. And what some people try to say, we understand that a legal definition of who belongs to who is a French citizen or not should be the basis for every political debate, but there is something more. A country, a democracy, a nation is not a society by shares. There's something else which is maybe mythological, which has to do with the past, and we need to debate about. We need to talk about it. We just can't say, okay, define it, and since you can't define it, it doesn't exist. End of the story, and then you have the National Front at 30%.
Raphael, LECLERC.
I think maybe one comment. The thing is, around the table, we all agree to say that Front National and extreme right ideas have gone mainstream for the last years, maybe decades. The question now is, we are 4 or 5 days from the first round of the local elections, and is this movement of the public opinion is going to be translated into votes? And when we look at your report, we see that people say, well, I'm going to vote on the first round for the Front National just to protest. What are these people going to do for the second round? This is, I think, the main question, because we all know that before elections, people would like to protest and express something, especially when the country is in crisis. The thing is, what are going to be the results, and what are the cities where the Front National can win? So far, maybe 10, 12, according to National Front leaders, Marine Le Pen. Are we going to see triangulars? How it's going to react?
Theory races for the second round.
Yeah, it's not sure that these parties and these ideas are going to translate into votes and a new map of France with a vague bleu marine or dark blue wave in the country.
Well, maybe not this time around, but I think Marine Le Pen is sowing the seeds for medium and long-term success. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a ground organization that is far better than it's ever been, and you showed the map earlier on. They're present in 600 cities, which is more than higher number of cities in which than that in which they've ever fielded candidates, mm-hmm. And they're appealing to a wider group of people. So even though it might not translate into taking very many cities in France during these local elections, I think you have to remember that the important thing for them and where they're likely to have more success is the European elections just afterwards. And after that, of course, we'll have others. And I think over the years to come, this is just the beginning of a message that she's sending out to the French public that just seems to be catching on a lot more than her dad's message did.
The best thing that could happen is that the National Front wins many cities, and which means that in 3 years' time, before the presidential elections, they will not only present themselves with ideas, they will have also a record. Where they ran a serious record.
They ran cities by the past.
A serious and recent record, because people forget. What happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago is more ancient than Greek history. They will go to the next election.
I wouldn't be that
They will go to
certain.
they will go to the next election with 10 or 15 cities and say, okay, you ran the place 3 years. What did you do? Are people happier, better off? Are they working? And I think it will be a very healthy thing, because the problem now is that you have parties that ran France for the last 50 years, and on the other side, people who did very little real politics. And of course, they can. It's quite easy.
I'm not sure it's
to
about the
criticize.
record. I'm not sure it's about the record. I think it's much more about some sort of schizophrenia that leads people to expect something that will never happen, and deep inside themselves, they know that the National Front is not able to run the country or to run a city.
That is not the impression I got in the field.
Well,
maybe it's not borne out by
because
your
they're
numbers.
very performative about the frustration, and they want to express it, and they want to show off to some extent that they really expect something different to happen.
It happens every election.
I don't
People
have the
believe that
statistical
after the
data.
election it will be better.
I don't have the statistical data to prove what I'm about to say, but there is a point when you do the report and you look the people in the eye when you turn off the camera and you say, seriously, do you believe the National Front will come to power? The party's never been in power, so it's a legitimate question. And people look you in the eye and they say, seriously, we think the time has come, and we think it's going to happen, not with this election, but with the coming election. So maybe it's something they've been saying for the last 50 years. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
and
I
that's very
did get the
performative.
sense that voters were serious about it being not just a protest vote, but something that could translate into National Front candidates being voted into office.
You know, one way to put it would be to say what the National Front victory is the name of. I mean, what does it stand for? And my feeling is that they are filling up the National Front with a lot of hopes that they could not fulfill. So it's about to say, you know, when they say we want the National Front to prevail and to win, maybe they also mean by that we want our situation to change drastically and dramatically.
Yeah,
and this is what they say. So maybe the National Front is a way to say something else about a real change that would improve their lives.
They all want to
Raphael
perform the
LECLERC,
government.
we can perhaps throw into the mix of all of this the fact that just as in Britain, to try to steal the thunder of the Eurosceptics, we've been hearing tougher talk on the part of the conservatives. Here in France, we've seen, for instance, the former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, one of his top advisors, the two of them have been in the news, his top advisor who came from before the National Front. How has that served the mainstream parties, poaching some of the ideas from the National Front? Has it bolstered them, or has it made them even weaker?
This is a clear debate now on the right-wing parties. When we look at the 2012 election, Nicolas Sarkozy's tactic was to try to go on far right and use Patrick Buisson's ID and try to, keep and take voters from the extreme right. It was a pretty tricky game he played, and he lost it. And many people from the UMP say it was a wrong tactic, because playing the game to increase the power of far right parties is.
Would you say that is the question that is right now tearing apart the conservatives? The opposition conservatives are very divided right now. Is that the question? How to handle the National Front?
The thing is, I think it's not the question of the UMP. I think it's the question of all parties, because when you look carefully from the extreme right to extreme left, all parties have interest to see a national front pretty high. For the right wing, it means that the country, the public opinion, is thinking right. For the left wing, having a Front National very high means that the UMP is going to be pretty weak. So everybody's playing this tricky game, and I'm not sure it's going to help them. And just maybe to come back on the idea of how Front National has changed over the last years, when we interrogate 2 or 3 years ago, when Nicolas Sarkozy was in power, a poll was made saying, do you think Marine Le Pen should enter the government? And it was something like 48% of right-wing supporters say, yes, the meaning of this is a National Front or right-wing supporters want National Front and Marine Le Pen to play a more important games. So.
And what are the latest polls suggesting for those European elections that Cyril was talking about?
Well, they're suggesting that National Front could be maybe the first party in front of the Socialist Party and the UMP, mainly because the abstention is going to be pretty high, and National Front electors are used to vote for this election.
And we will have full coverage, first of those local elections that are coming up this Sunday. The first round will have special programming here on France 24, the runoff on March the 30th, and then the European elections. I want to thank you, Raphael LECLERC, for joining us, Cyril VANIER, MIHAELY, and Nacira GUENIF. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.